Adulting is hard. Your vibe doesn't have to be. Welcome to Adulting Candle Company, where self-care smells amazing. From stress-melting wax melts to crystals that calm the chaos, we've got the tools to help you glow up your grown-up life. Shop now at www.adultingcandleco.com, because if you're gonna pay bills and fold laundry, you deserve to do it in the scent of lavender, vanilla, and victory. I'm Henny B, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Hooked on the podcast? Now you can hold the stories in your hands. World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches Volume 1 is now out on Amazon. 10 unforgettable tales of resilience, loss, and hope from the people forever changed by war. Available in paperback and on Kindle. Today's episode, Intercepted Part 2, United States of America. The drizzle of the rain cascaded off the brim of his Homburg hat. He stood on the dock, using his arms to hold the trench coat tightly around his body in an effort to fend off the cold afternoon March rain. He had never been to New York City before, and he had never seen boats as large as the one he saw now. As the steamer approached the dock, he waited patiently with Frank Templeton, the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, as the British delegation began to disembark. Austin Nichols was 27 years old, and this was the first time since he joined the State Department as an aide that he had been invited to meet dignitaries from another country. He had come to Washington, D.C. with Eric Hillis, the senior senator from his home state of Montana. Austin had been born in Helena, Montana, and graduated from the University of Montana in Missoula. After graduation, he had worked on Senator Hillis's campaign. After Hillis's victory in 1907, Austin had been invited to join the staff as an aide. Senator Hillis had retired 2 years ago, leaving Austin in limbo. Just as he had become comfortable with the idea of heading home to Montana and building a life there, he was approached by the current presidential administration to work in the Department of European Affairs. Working in the administration of Woodrow Wilson was an opportunity he decided to take. They had waited and watched as the gangway that connected the dock to the ship was put in place. Now, a half hour after the boat had docked, people started making their way to the shore. Austin glanced at Templeton, who had been watching the proceedings with his usual eagle-eyed stare. It was well known that he never missed a thing. "Sir, do we know what MP Harold looks like?" Templeton, without turning his head, grunted. "I met him once, many years ago, before he was an MP. It was when I clerked for Teddy." Templeton had served under Theodore Roosevelt as a clerk, and he rarely let a moment go by without mentioning it. "What I don't know is why he's here." It had been well over a month since British intelligence intercepted a telegram from Arthur Zimmermann, the man who served as the State Secretary for Foreign Affairs of the German Empire. His telegram had been shared with the United States, its President Woodrow Wilson, and eventually the American public. The telegram had promised that Mexico could retrieve the lost territories that were now the states of New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. All Mexico had to do was wage war against the United States and keep them off of European shores. Maybe he brought us a new recipe for fish and chips. Austin regretted the slight the moment he said it. He had a habit of speaking out of turn like that. Surprisingly, Templeton turned his head towards him and smiled. "I actually wouldn't mind that." He turned his head back towards the steamer. "Ah, here he comes. Looks like he has quite the entourage, too." And with that, he lunged forward against the grain of the disembarking passengers. Austin hurried to catch up. He moves fast for an old man, he thought, as he accidentally bowled over a little girl of about 6 he hadn't noticed. "So sorry." he said, though he wasn't sure to whom since he hadn't taken his eyes off his boss. He kept going. When he finally caught up, Templeton was shaking hands with a man even older than he was. The man was shorter, a little on the portly side, with silver hair peeking out from under his bowler hat, which dripped with rain. As the downpour grew heavier, Austin caught the quickening pace in Templeton's voice. "We'll be staying at the Palace Hotel this evening and taking the train to D.C. in the morning, Mr. Harrow. We can make our introductions at the hotel. Let's get you men to the cars and out of the rain." It took 45 minutes to load into the vehicles and make their way through the congested New York City streets, crowded with trolleys, horse-drawn carriages, and motor cars before they finally reached the Palace Hotel. Once inside the lobby, Austin made his way to the front desk to check everyone in and retrieve their keys. The process took another 15 minutes. Harrow had brought 6 others with him, and Austin registered them all with false names for security's sake. When Austin returned to the group with keys, introductions had already been made. He handed each man a key, and they all made their way to their rooms to rest. Austin had been reading a book entitled War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. People around the world had lauded the novel, and even though it was a difficult read, he was enjoying the tale of young Russian aristocrats during the Napoleonic Wars. He looked at the large grandfather clock in the corner of his room. It read 7:50 p.m. He realized he was hungry. Certain that he had seen a restaurant downstairs, Austin decided to head there. He straightened his tie, took one last glance in the mirror, and stepped into the hallway. The soft carpet muffled his footsteps as he walked towards the elevator. The Palace Hotel, being a high-end establishment, was one of the few in the city that had fully transitioned to electric lighting. The restaurant, however, favored a warm and intimate atmosphere, its room aglow with the hushed light of oil lamps. As Austin approached the maitre d' to be seated, he noticed one of the men from the Prime Minister's entourage sitting alone at a small table reading a menu. He brushed past the podium and approached the man. "Excuse me, you came with Prime Minister Harrow, correct?" The man looked up and seemed to recognize him at once. Yes, sir." He extended his hand. "Arthur Bennett, aide to Prime Minister Harrow." "Austin Nichols. Nice to meet you, Arthur." Austin glanced at the empty chair. "Do you mind if I join you?" "By all means. I don't mind at all." Austin sat. "Thank you. It's been a heck of a day. I really didn't want to eat alone." He picked up a menu. "Have you decided what you're having yet?" Arthur glanced down at his own menu. "My first night in the United States, and I can't for the life of me figure out what American food I wish to try." "Well, get whatever you like. Put it on your tab. It's on us." "Thank you. That's very generous." He looked back at the menu. "You know, I've had veal many times, but what is veal marsala?" Veal marsala is a veal cooked in wine and mushrooms. Very delicious. In fact, I believe that is what I shall have." Austin closed his menu and set it on the table. "Well then," Arthur replied, "I shall have the same." A young waiter appeared shortly after to take their order. Once it was placed, the two men sat in silence for a moment. It was Austin who finally spoke. "What's your role in all of this?" Arthur gave a puzzled look. "My role? I'm not really sure. Harrow just told 2 other aides and me that we're coming. So far, all we've done is dictate some notes and run messages from room to room on the steamer. Oh, what about you? What's your role?" Austin thought for a moment. He wasn't entirely sure himself, and he knew he had to tread lightly. He had no idea what this aide knew, or, more importantly, what he didn't know. "We were sent by Lansing to retrieve you this evening and bring you to Washington tomorrow. Something came across our wire that was quite alarming." Arthur looked up. "It was quite alarming to us as well. That's why we sent it to you. Harrow was quite bothered by Lansing not meeting us himself, you know." "Understandable, but from my understanding, this is what Wilson wanted, and as the president, he gets his wish about 90% of the time. My guess is that he wants Lansing nearby to discuss our reaction." Arthur rubbed his chin. "What do you think your reaction will be?" Obviously, you won't have insight on the official stance, but yours personally. Austin considered his words. Up until now, public opinion has been squarely against it, but this has changed things drastically. The telegram is out in the ether now, and the public is clamoring to join the fight. I personally don't think he has a choice. He hoped he had not shared too much. To be completely honest with you, Arthur said, that's what we were hoping for. The waiter returned with their meals, and they began to eat. Arthur took a bite, then glanced up from his plate. This is rather tasty. I'm glad I ordered it. I was hoping you liked it, Austin replied. Arthur took a drink of water and set his fork down. May I tell you something? This piqued Austin's attention. I don't see why not. I'm a 35-year-old man, and I walk with a limp. I'm old and slightly crippled, according to the military powers that be. He took another sip of water. Austin wondered where Arthur was going with this and how to respond. Should he mention that he'd noticed the limp? Would that be rude? In the end, he simply nodded. I felt guilty about working in a relatively comfortable office while our boys are out there dying in the French mud. Even though I share the office with two others, it's still comfortable compared to the trenches, I bet. Anyhow, I spoke with Harrow yesterday, and when we return to Britain, I'm going to resign my position. He's going to help get me assigned to the military. They need men, and as it turns out, if any war lasts long enough, a limp and old age aren't much of an issue. Austin sat back in his chair. They won't put you on the front lines, though, so I guess that's a small blessing. Yes, that is very true. Doesn't make me feel any better, however. Many will still perish while I get to hide in the back and live. And why? Because of a limp. Seems I have survivor's guilt without ever seeing the war. From across the table, in the dim light, Austin could see a tear in his eye. Austin was jolted awake by the train lurching to a stop. When he looked out the window, he saw the now familiar stone facade of Union Station. They were back in Washington, D.C. He had sat with the man he met the night before, Arthur. After dinner, they had taken a walk through the streets of New York City, a place neither of them had ever been. They had become fast friends. Arthur stood beside him, stretching his arm above his head before letting out a long, unrestrained yawn. We've arrived, Austin said. Oh, we stayed up too late. I'm tired. I agree, but we got to see New York. Arthur smiled. This is very true. Austin began to rise, collecting his bag. Arthur stood and did the same. Once outside, Templeton approached him. Nichols, I trust you had arranged for the cars. Yes, sir, they should be out front. If not right now, then any minute from now. They were joined by MP Harrow and two other men. Harrow addressed Arthur. Bennett, when we arrive, I will want you to join me in the Oval Office. Take notes and say nothing. Austin could see the nerves in Arthur's eyes, but like any good foot soldier, his response was quick. Yes, sir. Harrow and Templeton hurried away into the station, seemingly to get to the vehicles that Austin sure hoped were waiting. That left him there with Arthur and two others that he had seen but not met. Arthur readied to give introductions. He addressed Austin. Remember when I said I shared an office with others? Well, these are the guys. This is Thomas Ellery. He writes speeches for Harrow, and this is Miles Hanford. He deals with the public. Austin shook hands with each man, and they exchanged pleasantries. It was Miles who spoke first. You get to go into the Oval, Arthur. That's exciting. What are we going to do? Asked Thomas. Austin thought these guys seemed just as friendly as Arthur. You can wait with me. I have an office. We had better get to the cars, said Arthur, and the four made their way through the station and out front to the waiting vehicles. Austin never got tired of watching the faces of those seeing the White House for the first time. He saw it now as Arthur and his fellow aides stepped out of the vehicle. They stood with their mouths agape, staring at the majesty of the building that held the executive residence and offices. This reaction meant a little more to Austin. These men saw Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, and the London Bridge on a regular basis. Yet here they were, gawking at this marvel of American majesty. It made him feel patriotic and proud. Things moved quickly once they entered the building. Arthur was ushered away with Harrow, Templeton, and the rest of the British contingent, none of whom had ever been introduced to Austin. Austin turned to Harrow's other aides, Thomas and Miles. "You want a tour?" They happily agreed once it was explained to them that the alternative was sitting around awaiting news or for tasks to be given to them. The tour, however, went relatively quickly, and within an hour the three of them were indeed waiting in Austin's small office, making small talk, reading the newspaper, waiting. Over the next week, Austin spent his evenings showing Arthur, Thomas, and Miles around Washington, D.C. Arthur never spoke about what he saw or heard in the Oval Office or in any of the other conference rooms where he spent his days, and none of them ever asked. They dined in posh restaurants, strolled through the marble halls of the Capitol, and walked the shaded paths of the National Mall. They stood on the steps of the Library of Congress, admired the Smithsonian Castle, and visited the Washington Monument. In the evenings, they lingered at Lafayette Square gazing at the White House by lamplight, before heading back to the hotel. All the while, Austin remained outside of whatever was being discussed in those closed-door meetings. It was during a late dinner at Harvey's, the well-known seafood restaurant on 11th Street, that Arthur finally broke the pattern of polite silence. The room was lit with soft electric lamps that reflected off the white tablecloths, and the air was thick with the smell of fried oysters and fresh fish brought in from the Chesapeake. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved between tables, their arms balancing silver trays with practiced ease. The four men had just finished a plate of Chesapeake oysters and were picking at what remained of a loaf of warm bread when Arthur leaned forward in his chair and lowered his voice. "Tomorrow night, Wilson's giving a speech to Congress." Austin instinctively leaned in also. "About what?" Arthur gave a wry smile. "I can't really tell you, because lately they've had me sit outside the Oval, waiting. But I know about the speech. Did you know that Wilson writes his own speeches? Being the speechwriter for Harrow, this piqued Thomas' interest." "He does?" "He has a little help, but not much," Arthur replied. Thomas slapped his hands on the table in a delighted surprise. "Well, hot dang, that's impressive." Austin looked on as the mood of the three aides shifted from one of repressed emotion to a jovial outburst. What do they know? Was something discussed between them and Harrow while on that steamer from Britain? These were just a few thoughts that ran through his head. Tomorrow morning he would approach Templeton, if he could. He arrived at the White House the next morning before everyone else. His first act was to talk to Templeton. Austin made his way through the maze of hallways and offices until he reached Templeton's office. There, he waited. It was an hour and a half before Templeton arrived. "Nichols, what are you doing here this early?" Templeton asked, surprised. "I heard Wilson's giving a speech tonight." "That's no secret, Nichols." "I was at dinner with Harrow's aides last night when Arthur Bennett told us. But it was after he told us that the mood changed. All three aides got happier than I've ever seen them. It makes me think they came with an agenda, or at least Harrow did, and they knew what it was." Austin had laid it all out. Did he know what to think of it all? No. Did Templeton? He didn't know. Templeton closed his office door, walked across the medium-sized office, and sat behind the meager desk he had by a large window. Of course Harrow came with an agenda. Do you think Britain would send dignitaries like Harrow and have him bring with him intelligence, military, and foreign office personnel without an agenda? Austin felt like he should fade away into the walls. Of course he should have known. "When you put it that way, sir, I feel embarrassed for asking." Templeton stood. "Don't. It was actually a good question and a pretty astute observation. I'm actually surprised at any of his aides, except that one. His name escapes me." "Arthur," Austin interjected. "Yes, Arthur," Templeton continued. "It surprises me that the other two would know anything, unless—" He paused, scratched his chin, and went on. "Unless their goal is common knowledge over there, at least within the halls of the Admiralty. Anyway, I wouldn't worry about it." Arthur also mentioned that we should sit in the gallery to watch the speech. "I've never done anything like that before," Austin mentioned. This gave Templeton a slight chuckle. Yes, we will all be there. He's informing Congress this morning of the special session. He's aiming for 8 p.m. Now, it's not a requirement that you go, but I would like it if you did. You have a bright political future, and I think all of this can help that along. Austin was taken aback by the compliment. Templeton was not known for praising anyone, least of all him. Thank you, sir. That means a lot to me. You are welcome. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some work to do before I meet with Harrow and the others later this morning. Templeton picked up a file from his desk and began flipping through it. Austin rose to leave, reaching the door and opened it. Then something popped into his head. Sir, is Wilson declaring war tonight? Templeton looked up, his expression turning to stone. Shut the door on your way out, please. Austin did as he was told, without getting an answer. It did not matter how many times Austin walked into the United States Capitol building. He always looked up at the rotunda in awe. High above, the apotheosis of Washington floated in the center of the dome. The painted figure of the first president rising into the clouds surrounded by gods and goddesses whose stories he barely knew. The artwork was beyond his understanding, yet he enjoyed it all the same. The air carried a subdued excitement laced with nervous energy. From the murmurs around him, Austin gathered that nobody truly knew why they had been called here, but they all had an idea. He mingled for about 20 minutes, not knowing exactly where he was supposed to go. Finally, he spotted Reginald Harrow across the room. Maybe he would know where they're supposed to go. He made his way under the vast artwork and colorful frescoes towards the Member of Parliament. Mr. Harrow? Harrow, who had been nursing a drink, turned to face him. The two had only officially interacted once. Would Harrow even remember him? Ah, Mr. Nichols, is it? Yes, sir. I was wondering, do you know where we're supposed to go? Where to watch the speech from? Harrow's eyes flicked towards the far side of the rotunda, then back to Austin. Up the east stairs, 3rd floor on the right, gallery entrance. Best view in the house. Austin blinked. The man said it with such certainty, as if he had walked these halls 100 times before. Thank you, sir. Arthur, Miles, and Thomas are already up there. Go ahead and join them if you wish, or grab an hors d'oeuvre and mingle. It's up to you, son. Then Harrow briskly walked away, hailing the attention of yet another person Austin did not know. Austin's stomach was already in knots. He had no desire to eat, so he made his way to the gallery. As Austin entered the gallery, he quickly saw that the view was indeed everything Harrow had promised. The chamber stretched out below in a great semicircle. Rows of desks with leather chairs fanning outward from the raised rostrum where the speaker's chair sat beneath the towering, vertically hung American flag. The deep red, white, and blue stood in sharp contrast to the pale marble and warm woodwork of the room. Corinthian columns rose along the walls, their pale surfaces catching the soft golden glow of the electric lights overhead. The light left pockets of shadow in the high corners, giving the chamber a kind of quiet solemnity. The air carried the scent of polished wood, ink, and paper. A low hum of conversation floated upwards, punctuated by the shuffle of papers, the occasional cough, and the sharp crack of a gavel as the speaker tried to bring order. Below, clerks and stenographers prepared at narrow desks in front of the rostrum, their hands already poised over pads and typewriters. From this height, Austin could see nearly every seat on the house floor, and he felt the nervous energy emanating from below. Austin was not sure of the time, but it had to be close to 8:30 p.m. He looked down to the floor in time to watch a ripple of movement pass through the chamber, starting with the clerks at their desks and spreading outward like a wave. Members of the House began drifting towards their seats, their voices dropping to a low murmur. Up in the gallery, the ushers moved quietly along the rows, leaning in to speak to a few spectators and gesturing towards the benches. Austin caught the eyes of Harrow's 3 aides and motioned towards the benches. They joined him in the same row, and like everyone else, they waited for whatever was to come. The chamber grew eerily silent as a man walked towards the center aisle. Austin heard Arthur lean towards Miles. Is that Wilson? Looks nothing like the photos in the newsprint. That's the sergeant-at-arms, Osmond whispered. From below, the sergeant-at-arms' voice bellowed through the chamber. Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States. Wilson stepped into view, and the entire chamber erupted into applause, the sound swelling until it seemed to shake the very walls. Austin had chills as he watched Wilson, his country's leader, make his way down the center aisle amid thunderous applause. He approached the rostrum where the Speaker of the House, Champ Clark, and Vice President Thomas Marshall sat just above the lectern from which Wilson would speak. Wilson shook hands with both men, then turned to face the chamber. Austin watched as the entire chamber sat almost in unison, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor fading into stillness. Everyone in the gallery took the cue, settling into their seats, the silence deepening. Austin had never met Wilson, and he had never heard him speak before, so he was taken aback by the thin, high-pitched, reedy tone that emitted from the president as he began. I have called the Congress into extraordinary session because there are serious, very serious choices of policy to be made, and made immediately. By the end of the speech, it was abundantly clear to everyone in the chamber. Wilson was asking for permission to declare war, and by the applause, it was obvious that Congress would grant it. The morning was gray, and the rain drizzled off of his military-issued helmet. He stood at the ready, waiting for the signal that he would be going over the top and advancing towards the enemy trenches. Being in the fifth row of men, Austin estimated that he had 12 minutes until the moment he was called to advance. He glanced around the other faces in the trench. They were all scared and wore it on their rain-drenched faces. Austin glanced at his feet, seeing that they had sunk into the mud. He attempted to pull his right foot out of the mud with great effort. It made a squelching sound as it emerged. Again, he looked at the men around him. He looked to his right, and to his surprise, he saw a familiar face. It was Arthur, the British MP aide that he had met 3 months ago in that New York hotel restaurant. Austin made his way towards him, calling out his name. Arthur heard him over the explosions and gunfire somehow, turned, waved, and started towards him. They met halfway and embraced. When they separated, Austin looked at the man who had become his friend. I didn't expect to see you here. I told you, if a war lasts long enough, neither a limp or age are much of an issue. Arthur looked forward as the whistle blew. It was getting closer to their turn to go over. Why didn't Wilson mention the telegram in his speech? This was something Austin could only guess at. I'm not sure, but maybe it's because it would take Mexico to agree for it to become a real threat, whereas unrestricted submarine warfare is more immediate. In order for Congress to agree, it has to be a more immediate threat. Arthur nodded his head. That makes sense. Another whistle. Well, it's almost time. He turned his head towards Austin. If I don't make it, please know that I think fondly of you. If I do make it, I'd like to continue our friendship. Austin felt a tear from the corner of his eye. It mixed with the rain. I would like that. I feel the same. Another whistle, and Arthur climbed the trench wall, disappearing into the gray beyond. Almost as quickly as he had gone, he came back, thrown backwards into the trench by a burst of machine gun fire to his face and chest. Austin stared in horror as his friend lay motionless in the mud, eyes wide and unblinking. Austin sat up in his bed, drenched in sweat. This was the 4th time he had had that same nightmare. The visual of Arthur's dead body laying in the mud was one that stuck with him day and night. Since the British contingent had departed after Wilson's speech, he had heard nothing of Arthur or the others. He often wondered how the older man was faring, hoping his limp and age had spared him from the front lines. Moonlight shone through the window, granting him some visibility. He glanced around the room, and his eyes settled on the chair where his newly issued, neatly pressed army uniform lay, waiting for him, the one he would wear to France. You've been listening to World War I Stories Tales Beyond the Trenches. If this episode stayed with you, if it stirred something quiet or left you in stillness, share it, follow the show, leave a rating, help keep these stories alive. Our first collection now lives on Kindle. Search World War I Stories Tales Beyond the Trenches Volume 1 in your Kindle app and carry these echoes with you. For glimpses behind the curtain and stories between the stories, join me on Instagram at WWIPod_HennyB. And if you'd like to see your name in the credits, become a producer. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/World War I Stories and help power the next tale into existence. Thank you for walking back in time with me.